Good morning, everybody. First, I apologize for having shifted my talk in the morning. You were told I was ill. It's a bit of an exaggeration. I caught a cold in this room yesterday and had a bit of fever last night, so I thought it's best to do it in the morning. You're probably wondering what this photograph has to do with anything. I'm not advertising Saudi Arabian Airlines. I will apologize a bit. I'll be coughing all along here, so just bear with me. The reason I show this photograph is that it's hopefully going to elucidate a rather complex idea, the idea of talismans. I wrote a book with Hancock, Graham Hancock, whom you've had the great pleasure of hearing yesterday. In fact, we wrote 3 books together. But our last book together was called Talisman. It was published in 2004. And I'll be talking about this in the second hour of my presentation. By the way, I wasn't aware I was going to speak for 2 hours. I had prepared the talk for 1 hour, so I'll have to juggle a bit here. But Talisman is one of those strange books that it took us about 12 years to sort of have it right. And quite literally, we explored 2,000 years of civilization. We called it the intellectual archaeology. We went under the visible history, and we tried to dig below and understand funny things that happened along the historical routes, and particularly in contemporary times. What we set out to do originally was to track 2 traditions that emerged from ancient Egypt. Hence, why it was introduced as being a book that tracks 2,000 years of civilization. There are 2 traditions that emerge from ancient Egypt, just about as ancient Egypt is about to disappear. This occurred when the Romans took over Egypt and converted it into a Roman province in about 30 BC with the death of Cleopatra, and it was Christianized in the following centuries. And one tradition was, in fact, the ancient Egyptian tradition modified or transformed or metamorphosed into what is known as the Hermetic tradition. It's a rather complex thing, but in very simple terms, it's the ancient Egyptian mystery religion or mystery cult modified by writers, Greek Egyptian writers, to create this tradition. It disappeared mainly because of the persecution of the Christian church, and emerges very strangely, of all places, in Italy. This tradition emerges in Italy, in Florence, in the early, let me get this right, in 1460. And many believe, many scholars believe, that it was the impetus, it was the catalyst that kicked off or kick-started the Renaissance, and eventually the Enlightenment and the modern world. The reason being, and I don't want to go too much into that, Graham spoke about it a bit yesterday, is that it revealed ancient writings, the Hermetic texts, the so-called Hermetic texts, where those who discovered it, and throughout the ancient world believed that they were written by the Egyptian god of wisdom, Thoth. And what was in them seemed to be revelations, they believed to be divine revelations, of certain truths. One of them, strange enough, was the so-called heliocentric truth. It is said that Copernicus, for example, who was very much influenced by these texts, was inspired to explore the possibility of a sun-centered solar system. And that's how it probably came to be. He does acknowledge this in his writings. So it's very, very strange that this ancient tradition kind of spurs modern science. But what it did as well is that it created an esoteric strand that eventually was picked up by secret societies, particularly the Masonic societies, and created the so-called speculative or esoteric side of these secret societies, these fraternities. And we track it up to modern times. The other tradition, which again Graham spoke about yesterday, is the Gnostic tradition. Now the Gnostic tradition can be said in very simple terms to be, again, the ancient Egyptian mystery religion, but Christianized. And again, strangely enough, a bit like the Hermetic texts, they kind of disappeared, and they reappeared again much later, in fact much later than the Hermetic text, in Egypt, when the Gnostic documents were discovered in 1946 in Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. They were eventually, there's a very strange story about these Nag Hammadi texts. They were discovered by a young Egyptian, like many Egyptians, called Muhammad, and he had no idea what they were, took them to his house. His mother, sadly enough, used quite a lot of it, of these texts. There was a whole jar full of these texts in papyrus and on parchment. And she used them to light the fire of her oven. Luckily, a Coptic priest of the village recognized them as being ancient. He had no idea what they were. And somehow they made their way into the black market and were picked up by the Jung Institute in Switzerland by Professor Giles Kispel. I had the pleasure of meeting Giles Kispel. And he recognized them immediately as being Gospels. There's a famous Gospel of Thomas, and the one that Dan Brown did a big deal about, the Gospel of Mary Magdalena. And it kind of completely changed our perception about Christianity, in that there seemed to have existed not only other Gospels than the canonized Gospels, but older Gospels. And Gospels that contradicted the authority of the Church. Gospels that suggested very strongly, with the Magdalena Gospel, for example, that the legacy or the handing over of the Christian mission by Jesus was not passed to Peter, but to Mary Magdalena, meaning that the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, basing itself on the legacy of Peter, was based on the wrong idea. They were muffled for quite a while, as they did with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but thanks to Dan Brown, as a matter of fact, and authors like Michael Bejan with the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, they become rather popular, and they may well be, on the long run, but I don't want to sound sort of heretical here, but they may well be the demise of the Roman Catholic Church on the long run, because they kind of shook the apple cart here. So these are the two traditions that we tracked. And again, the Gnostic tradition is picked up at several stages in history and enters these esoteric strands of secret societies. The reason I'm saying this is that I'll be talking about these secret societies in a minute. And hence, talisman. Now, the talk that was advertised for you people was on the recent book that I've published with Graham Hancock called The Master Game. It is fair to say that the Master Game is an update and partial rewrite of Talisman. What we realized after we had published Talisman is that a few years later, we realized that, in fact, we had done a study inadvertently because we had to pass through a route, through a way, while we were following these traditions. We had to pass inevitably through the Crusades, and leading to the formation of the Knight Templars and a variety of events that finally leads us to Freemasonry. And what we realized is that we had tracked the origins of a contemporary problem, a problem that very much affects the world today, which is this unfortunate clash of civilizations that has been spurred or brought very much into the limelight by 9/11. And so we decided that we would readapt the book and give it this slant. It's a very exciting book. I'm very proud of it. Now, coming to this photograph that I've got here, it is in fact the Saudi Arabian airline. Now, let me give you a background to this because I was very much involved in this event. I worked 5 years in Riyadh. Prior to writing my books, I was a construction engineer in those days. And here is what happened. The time is 1982, and the king of Saudi Arabia, at the time, King Khalid, was a rather religious man, as most kings of Saudi Arabia. He in particular was extremely religious. He would religiously do his prayers every day. And he always was followed by, accompanied by bodyguards, of course, but also by what they call mutawas. Mutawas are religious men that stay with the king and they carry the Quran and they occasionally recite verses and so forth. Now, I was sitting in my office, minding my own business like everybody else in Riyadh, and my secretary came because I asked him to go and get tickets for me. I was going to fly. I had a journey to do. And he came and said, there's a bit of a problem. The tour operator, the travel agent, said that they're not selling tickets today. They've received orders from the Saudi authorities, and they're not to sell tickets. Now, this was particularly worrying. We thought there was probably a coup d'etat or something going on. Rumors started circulating in town, what had happened. And then we heard that they were closing the airports. No flights were allowed to take off. And we thought this is a serious problem. The problem, in fact, was something rather strange. The king of Saudi Arabia was about to board the royal flight. And that's how it looked like. And the mutawa, the priest that was with him, suddenly froze and said, you cannot go on this flight. And everybody froze and said, what's wrong? They thought maybe a bomb or something. And he said, the reason you can't go because it is displaying the Christian cross. Now, you may or may not know this, but until now, as a matter of fact, it is forbidden to display religious icons in Saudi Arabia, particularly Christian or Jewish symbols. You cannot have a cross, or even wear a cross, by the way. They would ask you to take it off at entry. They go as far as having asked Swiss Air to change its emblem, especially for Saudi Arabia, as you can imagine. Now, where was this cross? Everybody was baffled. You might see it, actually. I wonder if you can pick it up. Because the Saudi Arabian airline had existed for 40 years, and nobody had seen this cross. Nobody had there's no cross, as a matter of fact. Do you spot it? Okay. I'm getting a bit closer here. Well, what he saw was what we call an image in ground phenomena. You know this business about putting two champagne glasses together and you get this strange face in the middle? Rather than looking at the champagne glasses, you look at the middle and you see something else. You see something in the background. And what he saw, let me see if I can enlarge this. Well, you can see, spot it perhaps. Look between the S and the A. Do you see it now? Right. And once you see it, it sort of shines out, doesn't it? It's rather odd, isn't it? Let's see if I can. Oh, unfortunately, I don't want to mess around here, but there was a cross. Now the trouble is, once he saw it, like you guys, everybody saw it. And the whole country was flooded with this cross. Tickets, travel agents, napkins, you name it. What they were trying to prevent from having a Christian symbol in Saudi Arabia, now Saudi Arabia was flooded with this cross. The big question, of course, which we've never resolved, is whether it was done deliberate or not. The funny thing is it didn't matter. It didn't matter at all whether it was done deliberately or not. There it was. There it was. And there it could not stay. There it could not stay. Because literally what happened is everybody was, you know, every time you looked at it, people tried to explain to you what the cross was. People, you know, had a ticket and say, did you know there was a cross on this? It was the talk of the town. Everybody was talking about the Christian cross in Saudi Arabia. What had happened, and the mullah knew this, the mutawa knew this, is that a talisman was created. In this case, inadvertently perhaps. Suddenly, there was an image, a symbol, that had tremendous effect throughout Saudi Arabia, and probably eventually throughout the Arab world. It would be discussed, newspapers would have photographs of it, and you name it. And so, the king of Saudi Arabia said, stop everything. Stop flights, stop everything. I want this cross off. And they did. They actually did it. And there. By changing the A, look at the A, they changed it, and that's how now the Saudi Arabia looks like. They've removed one arm of the cross. Doesn't exist anymore. They've killed the talisman. Now, it's a very, very good example because it's a real live example of how a talisman works. And we're quite unaware of this, most of us, but we're subjected to these kind of talismans all the time. We've created our own. I mean, many of us do have talismans. And one of the obvious ones is a wedding ring or a pendant you might wear. That. Now, here is how they work. It's one of those phenomena of the human qualities. Our brain works in this manner. Now, if you had no idea what a Christian cross meant, then really it would have no effect on you. So you must be aware of what it means. Now, the good example is this ring, wedding ring. Now, a ring is a ring, but to the person who is wearing that particular ring, clearly it has a meaning. It has the whole story of the romance and the events and the wedding and everything that is related to this marriage. And people feel very uncomfortable if they lose a talisman. Sometimes I do a kind of little demonstration on stage where I say, well, if anybody has a ring, a wedding ring, I don't know if anybody wears these things anymore. Who has a wedding ring? Oh, it's a minority these days. Well, I usually say, well, give it to me and I'll give you another one. And of course they don't like it because it isn't, I'll give you a more expensive one. So it's not really the ring itself. It is what it means. And incidentally, since you heard the talk about ancient Egypt, Egyptians were kind of masters of this talismanic, we call it talismanic magic. It's a form of magic. It affects people so much that it is like magic. Egyptians were very, very prominent and very knowledgeable about this talismanic magic. And what you're looking at sometimes in monuments like the pyramids and temples and the hieroglyphs are talismans. They have a strong effect, and sometimes the effect is unclear. Many of us, in fact, it reminds me of what I was told once by Sir Ivan Edwards, the late Sir Ivan Edwards. He was the most advanced, most eminent Egyptologist of our times. He's the man who organized the Tutankhamun exhibition here in 1972. He was the world expert on pyramids. Famous book, the Pyramids of Egypt, which is still sold after 40 years. He told me once, amusingly, he said, you know, Robert, after 70 years of working and studying the pyramids, I'm beginning to believe that there is a little pyramid in everybody's brain. Because every time there is something to do with this Pyramid of Egypt, it draws enormous attention. I can vouch for this because I was very much involved with the events of the famous little doors they found in the pyramids in 1993. You may recall the little robot that climbed up the pyramid and found the door. In those days, we were in the middle of the Gulf War, but it hit the front page. A little door inside the Great Pyramid. That's it. It was the news of the week. Every single newspaper went berserk over it. It's one of those things. It's probably the world's most prominent, most powerful talisman. I was involved again with another story to do with the Great Pyramid, is when they were going to put a capstone on top of it in 1999. They were going to bring a helicopter to lower a golden capstone on the night of the millennium. Do you remember this strange event? It didn't take place. I'm embarrassed to say that I'm the one who prevented it. I wrote a book called Secret Chamber, and the Egyptian press made a big deal about it, and eventually they canceled it because I pointed out correctly that they were creating a talisman. They were going to do something like this in a much bigger scale, because everybody, every single newspaper, every magazine, every television station was there for the event, and they were waiting for this golden capstone to come down on the Great Pyramid. But to make things even more complicated and strange, is that they had the famous musician Jean-Michel Jarre. Some of you are from the 60s here. Remember Jean-Michel Jarre with Equinox and all this strange music? Well, he was going to do the music for this show, and they were going to project laser images on the Great Pyramid. One of the images was the Eye of Horus. Now you can imagine the Eye of Horus projected on the Great Pyramid with a golden capstone landing over it on the night of the millennium. It was the supreme symbol of the Masonic cult. They were going to do what this mullah realized inadvertently. Because I actually went to Egypt and said, listen, are you aware what you're going to be showing here? They didn't think it was a big deal. They thought, nah, nobody. I remember speaking to Dr. Zahi Hawass, the ex-minister of antiquities, I'm proud to say. I don't want to be mean, but I really want to say this. He used to say about me 15 years ago You know, in a couple of months' time, Robert Bauval will be gone with the winds. I'm still here. However, I did warn them that be careful. You're going to create a talisman. And boy, you're going to create one hell of a talisman. Great pyramid. Everybody's got a little pyramid in their mind, and bang, it's going to be in every front page of every newspaper. And it was already being picked up on the internet. People were talking about the Masonic symbol, the Masonic ceremony, and suddenly the Arab papers went bananas. They went bananas, they accused of a Zionist plot, and the usual thing, and it went berserk. They finally had to cancel it. I'm telling you all this because it's very important to understand something rather odd that I will explain in the second hour. Watch out, I tend to speak a lot here. In the second hour, we're going to look at something rather odd, is the so-called Masonic cities. You know, like Washington, D.C., that, again, Dan Brown made a big deal about it, and various other cities, by the way. Talisman, the original book, explores these strange city plans. Now, it's one thing realizing that there are these plans, but it's another to understand what it's all about. What were they trying to do? Well, what they were trying to do, or what they have done, is this. The city becomes a giant talisman. It becomes a giant temple, a giant cathedral, a Masonic cathedral. And if you understand it, you understand the motive. It's very interesting. You know, there are people walking around in Washington, D.C. now, and they you know, I'm inside a temple here. You know, and every time they see one of these monuments, like the obelisk on the Washington Memorial, or various other indications, they are constantly, what's the word? They're constantly jolted. You know, a bit like an advertisement, there's subliminal effect on them all the time. So the idea is to create those cities, and they created them in a very clever way, in a very secretive way, under the very nose. I mean, like Rome. Rome has these kind of talismans all over the place. Rome has 13 Egyptian obelisks. There is one actually in front of the Vatican. And, you know, nobody paid attention until, now that's how talismans work. The strongest of talisman is when nobody pays attention. And suddenly, somebody notices it. And the effect is even more devastating. It's more devastating because suddenly everybody wakes up and they realize, my God, you know, we hadn't seen this. We weren't aware of this. Like, for example, again, I keep speaking about Dan Brown, but it's true. Although he picked a lot of his work from other authors, he did bring this out for the general public, like the famous fresco in Milan of the Last Supper. You know, it was there for several centuries, and then somebody says, wait a minute, there's 13 apostles, and one looks like a woman, and wow, the whole thing now did or did not Leonardo da Vinci intended. Was this intended or not? We don't know. It's a bit like the Egyptians putting a golden capstone. Was there somebody behind kind of pushing this? Well, we begin to suspect that perhaps there is. Perhaps there is somebody behind the artist who is totally unaware of what he's doing, pushing this idea. And it becomes very obvious when we studied again, having realized what happened to Egypt. The revolution and the uprising, and you know, what was behind these events? Did somebody push this millennium celebrations? And we started looking, and we did find odd things. Okay. Now, I hope I've kind of given you the idea of talismans. Now, I will leave this brewing in your mind, because we're going to talk about it in the next part of this presentation. What I will do now is the other theme that we now have updated talisman, and we're going to talk about the master game. It's a very large book, by the way. If you do get it, you'll find it 626 pages. It's important to go slowly, to go through all the events in history, to really get the point. There's many things that are being missed out. And one of them is what we call the master game. Are we we're innocent players in a game? That's the question that is asked in this book. And in order to sort of bring it out, we have to go slowly through history. But I will start rather dramatically here, and before I do, I want to make sure that I don't upset anybody. Because as an historian, historians cannot be politically correct. It's a mistake. I've just written a book, by the way, which has caused a lot of controversy, called Black Genesis, with Thomas Brophy, an astrophysicist in America. And boy, we've had the Ku Klux Klan in America coming angry at us, and you name it. But our position is we do not play the game of political correctness. You cannot do that when you're an historian. You have to say what happened. You have to be open. So I love telling this story. I'll watch my watch a bit because I tend to preamble a lot, but it's a lot of fun, no, this kind of presentation. Yes? No? Yeah, I enjoy it. Okay, let's have a bit more fun about something else, which may seem, again, detached, but it has a lot of relevance. I presume you're all British citizens, most of you here, no? Yes. I find it very odd with British citizens that very often they're unaware of what is in the front cover of their passports. If you look at your passports, you will see that there is, of course, the herald, the coat of arms of the monarchy, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a lion and a unicorn. And then it's encircled with writing. And there are two sentences. Odd enough, they're in French, which surprises most people who see it. Hey, wait a minute, we're English here. How come it's in French? Well, yes, because they did speak French at the court. Until the 17th century, actually, French was spoken at the British court. And because, now one of the phrases is Dieu est mon droit. God is my right. This is where your culture stands on. God and my rights. I said is, and it's not true. People think it says God is my right, but it's not. The French is et, not est. Et means God and my rights. That means I believe in my right, and I believe in God. That's it. That's what I stand for. But then there's a funny one that says honi soit qui mal y pense, which is, okay, I'll tell the story, probably you know it, but I love telling the story because it kind of brings in the issue that I want to cover. It comes from the Order of the Garter. And legend goes that Edward II, when he entered the ballroom at the palace, one of the ladies at the court had her garter that had slipped to her ankles. And so, being the king that he was, he walked towards her and asked her to pull her dress up, and he adjusted the garter back on her thighs. And of course there was a gasp of shock in the congregation, and he turned around and said in French, honi soit qui mal y pense, which means, I don't give a damn what you think. Or rather, damn who thinks bad of what I've done. And that is what your culture stands on. Freedom of speech. Not only you have the right, Dieu est mon droit, but you have that freedom. Unfortunately, it's going away a bit, because of this political correctness. If I say Black Genesis, which is the title of my book, I say, damn, who thinks bad of this? It is those who think it's bad to say black or whatever, they have the problem. The king did not intend anything other than to adjust her garter. You know the problem, this is one of the big human problems. People misinterpret what you say and what you do. Now, I say this because there is a confusion in the modern world about a very, very sensitive subject that we need to clear up. And that's one of the tasks of the Master Game. It is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It has been haunting us for the last 60 years. As a matter of fact, it has been haunting us for the last 2,000 years. But in modern times, it has been a real sore problem. It has caused 3 wars in the Middle East, and it's leading us, if we're not careful, into a major conflict. And we need to wake up. We need to wake up because it involves a talisman. Wake up. So, but there is a confusion. There's a confusion. We have many terms that seem to imply the same thing. The Israelis, the Jews, very sensitive word, the Hebrews, the Zionists. And when you say one of them, people think you're thinking of another. There is a big difference between an Israeli and a Zionist. And that's what I want to clear tonight. So if we do have Jews in the congregations, or Zionists, hope not, but it's very important that we have this clear in our mind. Because, let me tell you, I've lived 35 years in the Middle East, and the rest of my life, which is approximately another 30 years in Europe, mostly in England. I've had one foot in the Middle East and the other in Europe. And I can see both worlds. I can go to the Middle East and become Middle Eastern. I speak fluent Arabic, and I think Arabic. And I can come to Europe and become European. It's given me a great advantage because I see the problem from both sides. And being with Graham Hancock, when we wrote this book, Graham Hancock, who was a journalist, we were the right kind of brew to investigate this very delicate and complicated issue. What has become, and the Western world isn't aware of this, they haven't caught this. There is a strange belief. It may not be as strange as it seems, as we'll discover in a minute. There is a belief in a conspiracy that is rampant in the Arab world. Not just with fundamentalists, it is very wide. That there is a Zionist, American, Masonic plot to take over the Arab world. It may seem strange to you seeing it from this side of the fence, but it is very, very deeply ingrained in the Arab mind. The question is, why is this belief there? So I'll go through it. Hugh Newman. Is he here? I need somebody to help me. They've played around with my computer. I need to switch to another file, please. Press escape. Who said press escape? Like I'm supposed to run away? Sorry? Okay, I'm pressing escape. I get this. I'm pressing escape, I get nothing. All right, hold on. Let me get out of this. Oh yes, okay, we're getting somewhere. Leave Saudi Arabia, and we're going to go here. All right. Here we are. Okay. Here we are. Hugh? Okay. The Master Game. It's been published in the States, and hopefully it will be available here. I think it's on Amazon here. On the 23rd of February, 1998, in the British published Arab paper called Al-Quds. Al-Quds means Jerusalem. Sold in bookstands here. It's published in London. Appeared this announcement. It's from Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda. They page, a full-page announcement. And it's a declaration of war. They declare a holy war against the American Crusaders. They actually call them the Crusaders, using an ancient term. Now, I'm always amazed, even when I'm in America, that a lot of people haven't taken the trouble to read this. There is an English translation on the net if you can be bothered. Because it is at the roots of a very serious problem, as you well know, that has caused a huge shamble in our world. It has finally led to the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the Gaza Strip problems, and some very serious problems that are brewing, the Iranians developing nuclear power. It is moving very fast, and we need to watch out. Well, what it says is basically, let me see if I can get the full text. There it is. And in there, it's blah, 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 blah. We, the new jihadists calling ourselves Al-Qaeda, so on. So, declare war against the American Crusaders. And they declare their intention. The intention is very clear, it's there. We will liberate the holy sites of Jerusalem. That is Al-Qaeda's mission. It is not to destroy the World Trade Center. It is not to bomb. This is just indirect messages that they're sending. The real objective is to liberate the holy sites. They are imagining themselves to be still part of the 2,000-year battle of who is going to own Jerusalem. They are still in a crusading mode. This is very, very important for us to realize. You're not fighting a modern army here. You're fighting, well, not we. What do you mean we, Tonto? Maybe I should bring this point out. We're all here and we're enjoying our lives, and some of us are going to go to the pub. I live in southern Spain, and I go to the beach and I play tennis and I write my books. I don't really care about who owns Jerusalem. I really don't. The trouble is that there's a lot of people who do care, and they're fighting this game, and we're caught in it. We are caught in it, and they're leading us to a serious problem. Maybe a world war. That is why this is important. It isn't just another conspiracy about ETs or whatever. This is a serious issue. Let's go to the origins of this problem. All right? Now, as history tells us, or maybe legend for all we know, maybe legend, that the kingdom of Jerusalem was started in about 1000 BC by King David. 50 years later, King Solomon built the first temple. Now, I must say that a lot of people take this for granted. It may well be true, I don't know. But strange enough, we have very little archaeological evidence of the existence of a kingdom of David. That's what puzzles most, in fact, most archaeologists and Israeli archaeologists have a lot of problem with this because there is no physical evidence. We haven't actually found anything archaeologically that confirms the biblical story. Okay. Is that the TV one? We're getting a whistle here. Hello? Hello? Okay, sorry. Where was I? Yeah, the archaeological evidence. Now, strange enough, I mean, you've heard about Egypt in the previous talk. You can actually see Egyptian kings. If you go to Egypt and you visit the Cairo Museum and you go to the mummy room, you can actually see Ramses II. You can actually see Tutmosis IV. You see them. You have the physical evidence. You can even see the shoes they wore. In fact, you don't have to go to Egypt, go to the British Museum. There is a lot of physical evidence about ancient Egypt. There is none, strange enough, about the kingdom of David. We have to rely on the Bible. But anyway, accepting Bible as kind of history, mystery, mythology, whatever. Now, about half a millennium later, the Temple of Solomon is destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. You know all the story. Zerubbabel, according to the story, rebuilds the second temple. The Romans come in the 1st century BC, and they capture Jerusalem. They put Herod as king. You know the story of the New Testament. And then the Jews revolt in 70 AD, and the Romans crush them and destroy the temple. It's gone. All that's left is your famous wall there, the Wailing Wall. It's gone. It's never been rebuilt. There is a deep-rooted desire. It's more than a desire, it's an obsession by some, well, it used to be by all the Jewish population, now the most fundamentalists, this desire to rebuild the temple. This deep-rooted desire. What makes it a bit annoying is that this myth of the temple has been incorporated in Masonic rituals. And although it's supposed to be spiritual, I'll talk about it in a minute, one of the ultimate objectives of Masonic initiation is the rebuilding of Solomon's temple. That would be okay. Why not rebuild the temple were it not for another religion claiming rights to this place? This is the Romans carting the treasures of the temple, the menorah, Ark of the Covenant. Where did it go? Well, read Graham Hancock's book, The Sign and the Seal. Probably ended up in Ethiopia. Christians come and build the Church of the Sepulchre. And about the 7th century emerges unexpectedly a new religion far away, based on the Old Testament, Islam. Islam in Arabia is founded by the Prophet Muhammad, and within a very short time they create the Islamic Empire, a huge swathe of of the Middle East and Arabia, going all the way to the Yemen, and indeed reaching southern Spain. And southern France becomes the Muslim empire. But before they do that, their desire is to go to Jerusalem. Now, why do they want to do this? They want to do this because it is unfortunate, perhaps seen from that point of view, that in the Quran, Muhammad takes a journey. It's known as the night journey, the famous night journey of the Prophet Muhammad. He is said to ride a magical horse from Mecca and flies to Jerusalem. He lands on Temple Mount. And on Temple Mount, he takes a journey up to heaven and he consults the prophets. He even consults Jesus and Moses. And he eventually talks to God. And when he comes back, he is imbued with his prophetic mission. And when the Muslim forces under the Caliph Omar go to Jerusalem, they find that by that time the Romans have sort of gone very degenerate, as we know, and the empire is slowly crumbling, and it's very easy for them to capture Jerusalem. They take Jerusalem and they build their own shrines on the place where supposedly stood Solomon's temple. They build the dome on the rock. A dome on the rock. This is in fact a 7th century building. What rock? Well, it's a rock on which apparently Muhammad stood, where he took his journey into heaven. Unfortunately, it's the same rock on which the Temple of Solomon stood, claimed to be the place where Cain and Abel were going to be sacrificed to God. We've got a problem. There's a piece of rock there that is being claimed. It is a talisman. It is a talisman. And they build the Aqsa Mosque. So the two of the 4 holiest shrines of Islam are on this mount. Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, call it what you like. Here's the modern photograph. You know, on one bit of it has the Wailing Wall, the remains of the legendary Solomon's Temple, and boy, here comes right behind it. It's a problem. Well, it's a problem if you believe in the talisman. Do you see what I'm getting at? If nobody cares about this rock, it's not a problem. Here is a view of what we call Old Jerusalem. In fact, nobody cares about really the outside. Sure, there is habitation. That's the sore point. That's the old city and the Temple Mount area. And the Wailing Wall is here. And here is the Aqsa Mosque, and here is the Dome on the Rock. This plot of land, this real estate. From a real estate point of view, it's really worthless. Can't build an hotel there or whatever, it's, from that point of view. Of course, it isn't worthless in terms of its historical value and this annoying talismanic value, this meaning that it has for these 2 major religions, which surprisingly come from the same source. They both stem from the Old Testament. This is the weird thing. You'd think they'd settle it and shake hands and say, okay, well, no. Worse, Christendom, the Christian world got involved in all these battles for quite a long time, the Crusades. Because in the 11th century, the Pope decided we must have this Holy Land again. We must recapture the Holy Land. There were people, peasants here working in the fields, and they had enough trouble of their own. They had an economic crisis like you have. And suddenly they were fired with this idea of capturing this holy land. And they mounted these crusades. For nearly 5 centuries, they tried to get this holy land, and it went from hand to hand. Well, the first crusade was absolutely horrific. I call it the first 9/11, the other way around. The crusading knights were not nice people. We have glorified them, with the Knight Templars. They were not nice people at all. And when they captured Jerusalem from the Muslims, they put the whole town to death by the sword. There is accounts from chronicles that are frightening. The horses had to straddle and paddle in knee-deep blood to reach the Temple Mount. The major knightly force were, of course, the Knight Templars, these famous Knight Templars. I don't want to go through the history of them, but you know the story, the 2 French knights who ride on a single horse and take a few of their companions and go to Jerusalem. And here is the weird thing. We never understood this, but they are welcomed by the king of Jerusalem, the Christian king of Jerusalem. He loves their idea, and he tells them to make their headquarters on the Temple Mount, hence their name, the Knight Templars. The funny thing is that although they were quite aware that these were Muslim shrines, this was turned into a stable, by the way. They kept their horses in the Aqsa Mosque. So you can see the Arabs really pissed off with this. I mean, that's the beginning of the problem. They are, not only the whole city was slaughtered, but on the holiest of shrines, it's turned into a stable. Now, we're going to jump a big history here. They fought, and there was crusades among crusades, and finally comes this man, known to the Arabs as Saladin. You've seen the film The Kingdom of Heaven, I think. Unlike the Crusaders, by the way, he was rather a chivalrous man. And he had strong principles about behavior in war, luckily for the Christians. Because in 1182, at the famous Battle of Hattin, he conquered and vanquished the Knight Templars, who are now the powerful force in the Holy Land. And this was the beginning of the end of Christendom in the Holy Land. And he takes Jerusalem. Unlike the Christian knights, he allows the Christian population and the Jewish population to leave the city if they wish, or that they accept the rule of Islam, but they maintain the religion. He was extremely chivalrous. He even spared the life of the king and of Jerusalem. You know his famous phrase, it's said in the film, "Only a king can kill a king." Wonderful man, really. I mean, we have a wrong perception about this man in the West. Anyway, here is the rock. Here is actually the rock. It's covered by the dome on the rock. That's what it's all about, really. It's your wedding ring without the meaning. It's kind of strange when you think about it. We're fighting over a rock. Anyway. What happened to the Knight Templars? Well, they evacuate the Holy Land, not after a few battles, famous Battle of Acre and so forth, and they set their headquarters in Europe, mainly in France, in Paris, and they have the stronghold in La Rochelle, and they have their headquarters in England, the famous Temple in London, with the round church. Again, Dan Brown made this popular. And they become a force of their own. It is said that they started the banking systems. It is said that they were a government within a government. They were an army on the loose. And they became a real problem in France. The story goes that the king of France, they owned castles and properties, but you know the rest. I don't want to go through too much of this. They were persecuted and banned, let me get this right, in 1307. The famous story of, well, you know the story, but there's a strange event here. The date, the 13th of November, was it? The 13th of November, 1307. It happened to be a Friday, hence your 13th Friday. Bad luck. They were burned to the stake, most of them. A majority of them escaped. Where did they go? All sorts of theories. One of the theories, there is a famous leader of the Templars who was burnt at the stake, Guy de Molay, in 1314, and he swears vengeance. You know a lot about the Templars, I'm sure. They sail out of La Rochelle, so the myth goes, with their ships. They managed to escape with their richness, and the big question is, where do they go? There is a theory that they went to Scotland. You know, Michael Bejan's and Richard Lee's and Henry Lincoln's books. More than likely, they probably did, or at least a contingency went there. The reason is that the Scots were very keen to have them. They were about to wage war against England, and they were very happy to have the Templars helping them out. It's possible. Now we jump, a huge jump, because, and it's probably correct, the Templar lore, the Templar beliefs, perhaps the Templars themselves, converted into speculative Freemasonry. Much of the Templar ideologies, we've had a terrible, terrible, terrible thing happening, what was it, last month? With this madman in Denmark who saw himself as a Templar and went to shoot people on rampage. I mean, he was actually a Masonic Knight Templar. I mean, and very proud of it as well. Well, we jump here because we're now moving very quickly into the formation of, I don't want to go to the history of Freemasonry, but the establishment of Freemasonry in the United States. And here you're seeing the actual first movement starting with Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States, perhaps the founding father, with his Masonic gear here. Here he is with his famous electrical, with the kite, you know his story. Here is George Washington, taking his Masonic oaths. Let's call a duck here. You know, they were mostly, if not all of them, Freemasons, and not surprisingly, it was very, very popular in those days, and it was very popular within the military establishment, and indeed, many of the ideologies, by the way, were particularly good. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to shoot down the Freemasons. Their ideas are very, very good. The basis of at least the philosophical movement of Freemasonry is based on the virtues. You know, they believe in initiating men, not women for some reason, into the virtues, meaning the high virtues, you know, courage and loyalty and patriotism and faith and so forth. That's good. It's very good. And they indeed have a constitution that served as the basis of the American Constitution. A lot of good ideas, fraternity and brotherhood and so forth. Here's George Washington putting the stone of the Capitol. In fact, most of the major buildings to this day, by the way, are ceremoniously inaugurated in Masonic law, in Masonic rituals. Certainly the Capitol and the White House. This is the Capitol stone. And here is the White House. Okay. Now, this is part 1A. We've reached modern America and the White House. Now, there is something very odd about this cornerstone ceremonies, is that they take place on very specific days. And you remember the 13th of Friday, the 13th of November, I think it was. Let me get this right. The capital was ceremonially placed, the cornerstone, on the 13th of November. You might correct me, I'm not sure if it's November. They chose the Templar date very clearly because it had meaning. The White House, this famous 4th of July, by the way, signing of the Constitution, of the Declaration of Independence, sorry, the 4th of July. We all know this date, the 4th of July. Well, amazingly, it was the Battle of Hattin, the 4th of July, when the Templars were defeated. It is an historical Templar date. We're getting Templar dates, or Templar astrology, and we know they consulted the stars before setting these buildings. There is clearly a Templar movement that flows into the Masonic lore in America. In fact, it's quite open, as a matter of fact. They have Templar processions very often in Washington and so forth. I'm saying this because you see where we're leading here. This crusading game isn't quite over yet. Okay. Now we go to something very different, which will join up. Are you enjoying this talk? Because it's new for me here. Is it good? Yeah, it's fun? Yeah. It's going to get more funny. It gets more weird. You're looking at the bearded man here. In fact, you're looking at Theodor Herz, the founder of the Zionist movement. Maybe I should put the full picture. Hold on. Excuse me a minute. So I have a problem with this. Oops. Uh-oh. What happened here? Right. Now, let me give you a background because, again, it's one of these stories that somehow was lost in the grapevine. Theodor Herz was a Austrian, German Jew who, here is a strange story. There is an event that took place in France in 1890. It's known as the Dreyfus Affair. I mention it here because we discussed it quite a lot in the Master Game, because it appears, believe it or not, in the story that it relates to the capstone of the Great Pyramid. That's how the research goes. You see the bridge I'm trying to get here. But anyway, this affair, the so-called Dreyfus Affair, involved a military sergeant of the French army from Alsace who was Jewish. He was accused of spying for the Germans, but it was clearly a very strong anti-Semitic act by the French army. They were very, very, very anti-Semitic in those days. Very. It was kind of a bad phase for France. There were slogans, death to the Jews, and unfortunately it was building up in Europe in that direction, leading, unfortunately, to the Nazi events. And who was sent there as a journalist to report this story was Theodor Herz. Another man, a Frenchman, a very famous writer, Émile Zola, famous novelist, who was totally disgusted by this arrest of this sergeant, wrote a very famous piece called J'accuse, I accuse. It's in France, it's sort of a household article, it's still discussed today. He accused the French government of anti-Semitism openly, and there was a whole fuss. It nearly caused a split in the government. He had to escape. He came to England, by the way. But finally, the sergeant was released, but this occurred many years later. Theodor Herz, disgusted with what he saw, this anti-Semitism, decided that when he returned to Austria to found a movement which he called the Zionist organization. And he set a new idea, a very clever idea. He said, all these Jews that are all over the place, in Poland, in Germany, in Russia, in England, they belong to one nation. Excuse me. Whether he was right or wrong is another matter. But he set the idea that Judaism is a nation. Who is using the same idea, by the way, which makes it very dangerous, is Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has claimed that all Muslims around the world, whether they're Indonesians or whatever, belong to a nation. Of course they don't. The Jews who were in Poland were Polish. The Jews who were in Hungary were Hungarians. But he set this idea, and that the dream of Judaism is to restore the land of Israel and to rebuild the temple. He set the movement. Very quickly, it became a very popular movement. Many financiers put a lot of money in it. Here in England, the Rothschilds pumped money in the organization. It became actually, the president of the Zionist organization in England was Baron Rothschild, which leads us to another problem. But something else occurred. I should speak very briefly of this because this is, again, a problem in the Middle East. A document appeared known as the Protocol of the Elders of Zion. You must have heard about this document. It was proved to be a fraud, or believed to be a fraud. It actually purports to expose a plot, and here we come to the problem, between the Zionists and the Freemasons to take over the Middle East through the banking systems. It was proved to be a fraud many years later, by the Sunday Times, by the way. But it became, unfortunately, very popular in the Middle East. It's now being spread. They actually teach it at schools in Saudi Arabia. Sorry, what's this? Oh, sorry. Now, here we are at the beginning of the Zionist movement. We're in the early 20th century. And of course explodes one of the big wars, the First World War. We'll skip the whole events, but eventually when the Ottoman Empire, who were allied to the Germans, collapses, the whole Ottoman Empire is subdivided among the allies, among the superpowers. Various countries like France take all sorts of place, but who takes Palestine is the British. They have the mandate for Palestine. They have the mandate for Palestine. And here we come to the end of the First World War. England is now the proprietor or the keeper of the Holy Land. The Holy Land has finally fallen in British hands, not the Crusaders. But that's a problem, because now both the claimers of this Holy Land, the Muslims, who are there, by the way, there's Palestinian people, and the Jews want to get rid of the British. Here is Baron de Rothschild, Baron Rothschild, head of the Zionist movement in England at the time. He befriends the foreign minister, Lord Balfour, Sir Arthur Rawle Balfour. And somehow they decide that it is time to approach the King of England and have him give his opinion about the possibility of having a Jewish land in Palestine, a Jewish state. And we have here on the 2nd of November 1917 is the famous Balfour Declaration. You know of the Balfour Declaration. It is a very simple letter, It's worth reading, actually, because it's amazing. You know, things have changed now, but in those days, Britain, and now it's America, but in those days, Britain, the superpower, could decide such things. They used to give each other countries. They actually met, believe it or not, in Brussels, long before that, where they divided Africa. They all sat down and said, we'll give the Italians this part, and the Belgians will have the Congo, and so forth, and they happily split the world and gave it to themselves. Well, this is the case where, dear Lord Rothschild, this is very important, because it is the key to understand this annoying problem. I have pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations. The word Zionist is very important, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavor to facilitate the achievement of this objective. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Now, what do you notice or not notice in this letter? The word Arab isn't there. It's as if they don't exist. They call them the non-Jewish communities. Kind of crazy, really. There was well over a quarter, let me get this right, about nearly 1 million Palestinians living there. Arabs, Bedouins, beards. Of course, this declaration from the superpower encouraged the Zionist movement to encourage Jewish populations around the world to say, that's it, start going there. And you know the stories, and this is the famous Exodus. You remember the film, The Exodus, where they went there and it was glorified as the, But the truth of the matter is that here were these people from Poland, from Hungary, from God knows where, coming to colonize, legally colonize, a place in the Middle East. And of course, what happened was the inevitable. The Arabs objected, and they started fighting, and there was clashes and wars, and it went on till finally the Haganah, the famous Jewish terrorist organization, blew up the King David Hotel, where the British Army had its quarters.
It wasn't the Haganah that did that.
Sorry?
The Haganah were the...
No, not the Haganah, you're absolutely right. It is the... Yes, the Umran, or whatever they call themselves. You're right, sorry, I'm rectified. The Haganah were the good guys. And they blew up the King David Hotel, and this finally, the British said, listen, we're fed up with this. We don't want this place. Let them fight it over. And they took the opportunity, we're talking about the post-war of the Second World War, they took the opportunity of saying, listen, we're going to hand over this to the United Nations, the newly formed United Nations. It's not more our problem. It is the United Nations problem. And they declared that on the 14th of May, 1948, they would abandon their mandate. Remember that date. Remember that date, because if I have enough time, I hope, my God, I won't have enough time. Anyway, what happens, of course, is that the Jewish organization, the Zionist organization, to be more precise, decides to, this is the moment, to announce that their intention to declare an independent state of Israel. And they were going to do that on the very day that the British were leaving, on the 14th of May, 1948. Remind me to tell you this little story about the pyramid and the capstone about that date, because it's rather weird. I'll do this at the very end. Anyway, this is what happens. Ben-Gurion, the appointed head of the Zionist movement in Israel, makes... here is Weizmann, by the way, the head of the Zionist movement, who is now in Washington. The Zionist movement has moved from England to Washington. And here is the man that is going to cause a problem, President Harry Truman. The three characters, it's very important to realize here. One in Israel, Zionist, the head of the Zionist movement with all his supporters in Washington, and President Truman, who unfortunately happened to be a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. Now, whether this has any relevance to the decision he's about to make, a rather odd decision, I don't know. I suspect it does. But that is why we're coming to this Masonic American Zionist plot belief. George Marshall, Secretary of State, totally opposed. There's a huge crash in the White House at the Oval. George Marshall is opposing the formation of the State of Israel because he is the war hero of the Second World War. He knows about the realities of the ground facts. This is going to cause a war. This is going to cause a war. It isn't just, they're arguing on political, philosophical points of view. You know, the Jews, they were the biblical people, and they suffered in the Holocaust, and yes, it's true. But that is political. The reality is that if this land is declared a Jewish state, they're going to have the whole Arab world, and they did have the whole Arab world, on their back. But comes another character, and this is the weird story, a fellow called Mark Clifford, who is an aide to President Truman. He recently died, by the way. He wrote his memoirs, and it's very, very clear that he had a lot of influence there. Indeed, there is a battle, literally in the Oval, a shouting battle, where George Marshall refuses to listen to the arguments of this young man. He was rather young, in the early 40s, who is arguing the case because President Truman says, please, come to my office. I'm going to call George Marshall, and I want you to make the case, because I want to go for the State of Israel. His famous phrase is, I've got more Jewish voters in America than I've got Arabs. That's what he had in mind, I suppose, as well. Anyway, declaration in the Temple Knesset, Ben-Gurion reads the declaration of the State of Israel. I've published part of it in our book. It's very interesting to realize, well, you can see our famous young gentleman, Theodor Herz, who started the whole movement, and it's argued on biblical grounds. You know, we that were here 2,000 years ago, and the David, the whole this stuff. And you can imagine the Arabs sort of listening to this and thinking, what the hell is going on? 11 minutes afterwards, contrary to the position of the Secretary of State, not presented to Congress, President Truman is presented with a draft which he signs. It's 5 lines. And it says, the government has been informed that a Jewish state has been proclaimed in Palestine, and recognition has been requested by the provisional. It's his own handwriting. They adjusted it because there was no government. So he puts it, the provisional government thereof. The United States recognizes the provisional government of the de facto authorities, and the new, somebody made a mistake, the Jewish state, they don't want to call it the Jewish state, the new state of Israel. Stamped and signed Harry Truman on May 14th, 1948, 11 minutes after Ben-Gurion's declaration. Something went on. And here is the question we ask in the master game. We're dealing with a rather odd guy here. We're dealing with a guy who 3 years before took a decision that only God can take. He's the first man and the only man so far, and thank goodness, that has authorized nuclear bombs to be thrown on a civilian population. 2 nuclear bombs were thrown on Japan. You put yourself in his shoes to make that decision. It is a horrific decision to make, even though the arguments that it was going to shorten the war and all that. No human being should take that decision. Right or wrong, no one should have the power to take that decision. And yet, here is a man who took it. Here is a man who played God. Is he playing the biblical game here? Is he has the power, after 2,000 years, to recreate the state of Israel. He has the power to set the scene to rebuild the temple. Did it cross his mind? Well, it must have. He was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, the highest grade you can imagine. Surely it crossed his mind. It probably crossed more than his mind. That's what we're saying. And this is why the Arabs believe in this conspiracy. You have the Zionist lobby. You have an American president, and you have the Scottish Rites together entangled in a decision of creating the State of Israel. Are they right in believing this conspiracy, or are they wrong? Is it true, or is it not true? It does appear to be so. That's the annoying thing. The 67 war. Well, the Arabs, 5 states, declare war against Israel. They form a coalition: Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. And they attack Israel. They're badly armed. The Americans pour armaments in 1948, and Israel manages to keep them out and survives. And finally, the 67 war. 67 war changes everything because, foolishly, the Egyptians are prompt to attack Israel. And in 6 days, you remember the 6 days war, this famous 1967 war, the Egyptian army is totally obliterated, and Moshe Dayan walks into Jerusalem. And Jerusalem becomes again in the hands of these original, true or not, mythical owners. The Jewish people. And we've had a problem ever since. We're now 2011. This is a very relevant discussion, let me tell you, because in 2 weeks' time, the Palestinians are going to the United Nations and are going to do exactly what Ben-Gurion and the Zionist movement did 60 years before. They're going to declare an independent state of Israel, and they're going to put it to the United Nations. And are you ready for this? The Americans have already let it known they're going to veto it. What do you expect the Arabs to believe? This is the problem. Meanwhile, we have a series. Let me go through a little bit more here, because this led us to all sorts of complications. Are you still enjoying this, guys? Because I see you very quiet down there. Give me a bit of encouragement. Come on. Sort of yays and claps and things. Thank you. Yeah. That was good. What's happening here? Okay. Finally, thing comes to our last 15 years, this big mess that occurred. You know the history, I'm not going to go through it. The first Gulf War, and the Americans go and liberate Iraq. One of the funny things about this war, a lot of people didn't quite understand what was in the mind of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was born in Tikrit. Remember where they found him, the hole in Tikrit, when they finally captured him? Tikrit was the birthplace of Salah ad-Din. He saw himself as a modern Saladin. The game is still being played, that's what I'm trying to tell you. This weird game that started fighting over this rock. Anyway, here we go, and the Gulf War, and they go and bomb and all this stuff. And comes this gentleman. Comes this guy, and you've seen his declaration of war. He takes it to extremes. He takes it to extremes and actually makes it official. We formed an organization called Al-Qaeda, the leaders. Al-Qaeda means the leader. And we are going to declare war against these crusaders who are still trying to take and control us. And they genuinely believe that the state of Israel is really little America. It's America's in the Middle East. And they have reasons to believe this. Again, true or not, Israel is funded at the rate of $2.5 billion to keep its army. All the armament, the F-16s, everything you've seen there is used by the Israelis. And the Israelis are armed to the teeth, by the way. They have at least 25 nuclear warheads on alert all the time. Well, I don't want to say too much about this guy. W. To make it even more annoying for the Arabs, he takes his presidential oath on the Masonic Bible of New York, setting fuel to the fire, as we say. And of course, 9/11. And of course, 9/11. Now, why 9/11? Yeah, okay, they're pissed off. Al-Qaeda has declared war against those crusaders. They're pissed off, but why there? Why did they go and bomb Israel? Well, they can't get anywhere in Israel, I can tell you. Anything that gets anywhere the borders of Israel will be shot down big time. They can get a few suicide bombers here and there, but this sort of thing, can't do it. And in many ways, the real big guys, the real crusaders, are the Americans, as far as they're concerned, who are all plotting. They're Freemasons. The government is governed by these elite Freemasons, they believe, and they're in collusion with the Zionists in Israel, and they are our real enemies, and we're going to do this to them. We're going to do this to them. And so they did. But the funny thing is the choice of targets. The choice of targets. Well, you know them. Certainly this last week we've heard, boy, the BBC was full of it. And every television station, we reviewed again all this drama of 9/11. And here's the Scottish Rites in New York, where they're on 16th Avenue. Here is me at the Scottish Rite. I was there a couple of months ago. Now, it is customary in Masonic rituals, when they do this rebuilding of Solomon's temple thing, to do it on what they call a tracing board. It's a kind of like a prayer rug. And it's laid on the floor, and they do these strange things. The tracing board symbolizes the Temple of Solomon. It is mainly showing the so-called two towers or columns known as Boaz and Jachin, power and justice, J and B. The two towers, and it leads into the Masonic world or the Solomonic world towards a pentagon. A pentagon. If you say to any Mason who is conversant with this kind of symbols, you say two columns or two towers and a pentagon, he will immediately say Solomon's temple. It translates immediately in the mind of those who are aware of these rituals. In fact, here is another weird one. Of course, you can convert the pentagon into a 5-pointed star. Stuff you have on your Christmas trees, by the way. The designers of the Pentagon. I've got the date 11 September 1941 because the Pentagon was ceremonially begun with another one of these Masonic kind of rituals on the 11th of September 1941. Now, it's a pretty odd coincidence, to say the least. But here is another odd one. The man who decided on the design and the man who decided on the location of the Pentagon is President Roosevelt, the predecessor to Truman, who again, annoyingly, was a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. And here is another weird one. President Roosevelt was 32nd President of the United States. What are the odds? And President Truman was the 33rd President of the United States and 33rd degree Freemason. I mean, it's pretty odd. It must have kind of played in their mind. How come I am the 33rd President of the United States? I mean, what are the odds of me being president in the first place, let alone the 33rd president? And let alone being a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, whose symbol is a pentagon. Better still, it is a pentagonal stronghold that holds the 5 armies of the Templars, of the Knights, to defend the city of Jerusalem. That is pretty weird stuff. I won't bother you with the rest. You know the rest too well. I want to finish with this bit because, of course, having lived in Egypt for so many years and all this Egyptian revolution and the Arab Spring, but remember the date of the 14th of May 1948, when Ben-Gurion decided to the declaration of the State of Israel, and when Harry Truman signed his famous letter that you saw, and where the whole problem started. 50 years later was the Jubilee, in 1998. Al-Qaeda comes out. But something rather weird happens, of all places, in Paris, that seemingly has nothing to do with this. The French government, under Chirac, another prominent Mason, invites President Mubarak and the foreign minister of Egypt, the culture minister of Egypt, and the ambassador, Egyptian ambassador in Paris. And of all things, they're going to do some sort of ceremony on the 14th of May, 1998. Al-Qaeda is about to make its declaration, and on the 14th of May, 1998, all the Jewish world, particularly in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, are celebrating the Jubilee. The Jubilee. The whole story starts with Theodor Herz. We went through it. And they celebrate this Jubilee. It's a pretty odd date to choose to do the following. They invited President Mubarak and all these members of the Egyptian government to assist at a strange ceremony that took place at the Place de la Concorde, was to place a golden tip on the obelisk, on the obelisk that stands in the Place de la Concorde. Okay, why not? Pretty odd date, why not? The ambassador the Minister of Culture should have been aware that there's a kind of connection to this date, but never mind. I mean, And they do the ceremony. And like one of those weird things, we talk about it in our earlier book, Talisman, but it didn't occur to me to go and check the plaque. You go and see this plaque, it's pretty weird. Yeah, they tell you about Chirac inviting Mubarak and the people who are present and so forth, but then you see two names that are pretty odd, they shouldn't be there. I mean, it's pretty weird. You're going to find this very weird. There is the name of Yves Saint Laurent. You know who Yves Saint Laurent is, of the famous house of Yves Saint Laurent, the famous fashion designer. What the heck has he got to do with all this? And there's another name of his lover. He was gay. Pierre Berger, who is the founder, really, of the house of Yves Saint Laurent. Now, what are these two names doing there? Well, apparently, they were quite happy to donate the gold that they lined the tip of the... Sounds pretty innocent. Until Graham and I said, well, let's check a bit this. Because here is the names forever and forever on an ancient Egyptian obelisk, which we know is so pleasant to the Masons all over the world. You know, we have obelisks in London and Paris, and they're all done on Masonic rituals and so forth. This is pretty weird. When you check the name of Pierre Berger, check it. By the way, all I've told you, you know, have fun on the internet, have fun on books. It's all based on source material. I'm not inventing all this. Is the following. Pierre Berger, apart from being a staunch Zionist, has recently been given permission to create a museum in France. Now get ready for this. You remember the Dreyfus affair? The thing that kick-started the Zionist movement, these French sergeants who got arrested, and Theodore Herz who went there, right? It is going to be called the Dreyfus Museum. It is all about the Zionist movement. And it is going to be in the house, he actually bought the house, of Émile Zola, who wrote the famous piece, J'accuse. Now, what are the odds? What are the odds of having the name of this guy who is doing all this on this obelisk on the 14th of May, 1948? It is weird, to say the least. Are we creating another one of these weird little talismans? And it would have gone sort of, somebody is waking up to it, it happens to be me and Hancock, and saying, hey, here is another one of those. Because once you guys become aware of it, you're not going to see this obelisk ever again in the same way. It's nagging, isn't it? Whenever you're going to go to Paris, believe me, whenever you see this obelisk, you're going to remember the story, and it's going to take you all the way to Theodore Herz. I have planted a seed in your mind. I have planted a talisman. Not because I wanted to, but because it's there. God knows how many of these things are about. Whoopee. We're going to end this part of the story. How much time do I have left? I'm a bit lost in my time. Organizers? 10 minutes. All right. I'm going to show you a very weird talisman. One that you probably have hopefully not heard much about. It is very, very weird. It may be inadvertently there, I don't know. Ten minutes. Mm-hmm. Somehow I've lost it. No. Talks on tour. All right, maybe here. There we are. Hopefully it's here. Yep. I'm going to show you what could be. Now, we know of Washington, D.C. and all this. I don't want to go into all that. I'm sure you've heard about it. You've read Dan Brown. And we're going to go into another one, a rather weird one. And it starts here. There's a little background story to go through. It is a 15th century etching, 15th century. And it shows, it's written in Old French, but basically it says, here is the goddess of the Egyptian Isis, who comes to our shores. She's actually arriving, according to legend, in Paris with her boat, famous boat of Isis, which becomes the boat of Paris. You see that. And she's greeted by a congregation of noblemen. Look at what is above her, her little flag. You see the flag up there? Excuse me. There is a dog on the flag, right? It's supposed to represent, I mean, if you know the mythology, it's very easy. Isis is associated with the star Sirius, the god, the dog star, hence the dog. The boat is appropriated as from the 15th century and becomes the boat of Paris. It's got the famous fleur-de-lis, the symbols of the French monarchy. Now, here is a weird one. When Napoleon did his expedition in Egypt, when he returns, he asks for a commission to investigate whether it's true or not that Isis came to the shores of France and whether she did come with a boat and so forth. Apparently the commission, which were formed mainly of Freemasons, say, yes, it's true. And so he asks in a written letter, we actually have the letter, it's published in our book, to change the coat of arms and to put Isis on the throne, you see her here, and instead of the dog, now she has her star. It's pretty weird. Paris becomes the city of Isis. You'll still find it today. You'll find restaurants called the restaurant of Isis. You find boats that go up the Seine called the boat of Isis and so forth. There is a real history behind this. It seems that when, excuse me, I'm glad I told this morning, not this afternoon, it's getting worse. There is a history behind this. When the Romans occupied what was known as Gaul in those days, they formed the city of Lutece. Lutece became Paris, and there is arguments why it was called Paris. Some historians say that there was a tribe called the Parisi, but there is another more likely story, is that the Roman emperor, who actually went to reside in Paris, let me get this right, Mark Aurelius, was a follower of the cult of Isis. And in fact, they built a temple to Isis. It was quite common in Roman times to build temples of Isis. You have them in Oxford, believe it or not. They've actually found temples of Isis all the way here. And in the city of Paris, which was, of course, in those days, literally the island, the Cité, which the French call today, l'île de la Cité, where there is Notre Dame. And it's in the shape of a boat. That's why they kind of like the idea of the Isis boat. And the story goes that the temple was placed outside, and it was therefore known as, because they spoke a dialect of ancient Greek, Parisi. Parisi means near the temple of Isis. It's as simple as that, and hence probably the name of Paris. Now here's another weird one. We come to these strange things that have been going on in Paris for a long time. One of the things that was done, and it's in modern times, by the way, you're looking at an image of the Louvre. famous Louvre, which is very much in Dan Brown's book, by the way. I keep butting into Dan Brown in this. And there's the axis of the Louvre. Do you see it there? Is it clear enough? I'm not sure. Yeah, kind of. And it passes now through, of course, the apex of the famous glass pyramid that has been put there. Glass pyramid of Ming Pei, which has the proportions, the exact proportions of the Great Pyramid, by the way. And here, I'm not seeing it too clearly, is a statue of Louis XIV, and it is the famous historical axis. People, when they stay at the Louvre, and they visit the Louvre, and they look down towards the Champs-Élysées, you know, the famous Champs-Élysées of Paris, they think the axis is prolonged. Well, not so. The axis of the Louvre is not the axis of the Champs-Élysées. The historical axis of Paris runs at an angle. Oddly enough, and by coincidence, it shoots to the rising of the star Sirius. Here you can see it in reverse. Here's the Louvre. Note its curious architectural shape. You'll see why. It is in the form of we call it the crab. It's like a horseshoe. You see it here? Here is the pyramid, an obvious Egyptian symbol, right? Here is the obelisk that we were talking about. You remember? When they put another obvious Egyptian symbol. Beyond is the Arc of the Triumph of Napoleon, the Arche de Triomphe, which is known as the place of the star, the Place de l'Étoile. It's a pretty odd name because when you extend that axis, it actually leads to the star of the so-called city of Isis. Coincidence upon coincidence, pretty bizarre stuff. And at the end, of course, is the new district of La Défense. I worked there at La Défense, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but many of the buildings have strange Masonic names, but that's another story. When you go on the historical axis and you look down, the obelisk is at my back, and when you look down the Champs-Élysées and you're there on certain dates of the year, the sun will set perfectly into the arch. Now, here is the weird thing. It sets on two dates, one of them being the 15th of, let me get this right, 15th of February, is that right? I'm sorry, I've got so many dates in my head, but I think it's 15th of February. It's supposed to be the transfiguration of Christ. Louis XV, who set the axis, by the way, with his architects who built Versailles and so forth, they set the axis originally, associated the solar king of France, the King Louis XIV, to his solar destiny. So we can understand it so far. Now here is the weird thing. I'm going to have to jump here because I have a feeling, yeah. And now I've gone a bit further. I'm looking at the famous Grand Arch. Some of you have been to Paris and seen the Grand Arch of La Défense. It's a huge arch at the end of this axis, and it's known as the Grand Arch of the Fraternity. So it rings a bell, doesn't it? The Arch of the Brotherhood. And the sun does set in it. Now, weirdly, it is not set. People think so again, but it is deviated. Do you notice? Here is the historical axis leading to the Louvre, right? And here is the axis of this weird building. It's actually turned deliberately. It's actually turned 6 degrees from the axis. Let's not go into the mathematics. It gives the date of the 24th of June, the setting sun on the 24th of June, which is the date of St. John's. St. John is St. John the Baptist. St. John is the patron saint of Freemasons, and it is the new year of the Masonic cult. If you go to London on Queen's Street, is it? Where they have the headquarters, you go on the 24th of June, you'll find big celebrations there. It is pretty odd. It's obviously not a coincidence. We're beginning to sense these monuments as talismans all over the place. Here is Louis XIV, with his solar pedigree. Here we come to the French Revolution, and bang, there is the decrystallization of France. Many of the prominent members. What you see here is Voltaire and Rousseau, the philosophical movement. And they announce the supreme being with the eye. The rudiments of Masonic ideologies, the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Here we come to again, this famous symbol. See where I'm getting with this ceremony in Egypt that was going to take place, and the strange links. And of course, it's on the great, so-called the Great American Seal. It is what the President of the United States stamps on every document that he signs. The Great Seal of the United States. A hovering pyramidion over a pyramid with the New World Order, as you know. And this was proposed inadvertently for the millennium at Giza. And are you ready for this? It was announced when they did the ceremony on the 14th of May, 1998, at the Paris Obelisk, by none other than Farouk Hosni, who was the president of culture, who's now under arrest. Weird stuff, isn't it? What is this game? Who is playing it? What are these people who are playing the game who are, we're told, have things like $70 billion in their bank accounts? President Hosni Mubarak has amassed $70 billion. Are we looking at some sort of game that involves these players like Yves Saint Laurent and Pierre Berger and God knows who? And are they playing this crusade game? I don't know. I don't know. What we're doing is we're laying it down in a book of 626 pages, exploring these talismans, exploring these connections, and we realize that the game is going on. The game is going on, and it's heading like a locomotive because Iran is on the verge of coming up with nuclear power. And once this happens, believe me, the game takes a totally different face. Then we have two opponents armed with nuclear armaments, and they are playing the game. I think I'll stop here because I'm losing my voice, and I think you've had more than enough of this. Thank you very much. If you have questions.
If you don't hear it. Is that okay? You okay to answer
your
question? Any quick questions?
I need to do something before you ask the question. I'm going to really bug you here. Because you think you've seen the talismans, right? I mean, it's pretty strange things. It's obelisks and arches and... I want to show you why. I'm leading to it now. No words. The statue of Isis in the heart of Paris. No, better still, it is in the Place de la Bastille after the French Revolution. Here is, amazingly, the Convention, the French revolutionary government with cups drinking water from the nipples of Isis, known as the fountain of regeneration. They're all, by the way, Freemasons, Danton, Robespierre, the whole lot. Pyramids celebrated in post-revolution France. Josephine, Grand Mistress of the Masonic cult in Paris. I'm going to skip here. Napoleon in Egypt, presenting to all religions. Now, this is a pretty weird one. you got the Christians, you got the Jews, very recognizable here, and the Muslims. He's telling them to join the Supreme Being. This is an etching from Napoleon in Egypt. The Temple of Luxor. The Temple of Luxor. There is a missing obelisk. Where is the other one? In the Place de la Concorde, right? Here it is. I'm going to have to skip here. There's lots of funny stuff. Here is an image of Paris taken very recently. Look very carefully, please, because this is very weird stuff. You see the Louvre here with its peculiar crab shape, the axis, which is off by 6 degrees, you remember? And here is the historical axis. The obelisk is here. The pyramid is here. Excuse me. The arch, the Place de l'Étoile is here, and La Défense, the district of La Défense.
Okay, has anyone questions?
No, hold on. Hold on, please. Hold on. Here is another picture of Paris taken by a balloon quite a long time before. Many of the buildings are missing, but here is the Louvre. Here's the Louvre. Here's the slanting axis of the Louvre, and here is the historical axis of leading to an area which becomes La Défense. Please look at this very carefully. Paris. It is not Paris. This is the city of Luxor where the obelisk came from. Weird stuff. Weird stuff. There's a whole story behind this, but you'll have to read the book. When we came to this conclusion, let me tell you, we were, so are we going mad? Is what? Because the evidence is pointing to some very weird stuff. Okay, questions?
Gentleman, Mark, yeah?
Do you think the Black Genesis is the direct manifestation of the Zionist movement?
No, God forbid, no. No, Black Genesis, my book, is exploring the origins of the pharaonic civilization. It is a well-researched book. It is based on 30 years of research done in the Egyptian Sahara, which has finally identified a prehistoric black African people living thousands of years before the pharaohs, who now we know have developed all the rudiments of pharaonic civilization like astronomy, science, mathematics, stone building, domestication of cattle, and eventually came to settle in the Nile. It's a well-accepted thesis, by the way, by many Egyptologists and anthropologists. Nothing to do with all this. It's the beginning of a story, yeah, of course. But you have another question, sir?
Yeah. Do you think Black Genesis is the next evolutionary process in our humanity?
Yeah, I do. But you're going off the subject. But since he's asked the question, why not? I've given a talk at the university. I'm going to America tomorrow, by the way. I'm touring the whole East Coast, giving talks on Black Genesis. There's a very big conference in Atlanta known as the Nile Valley Conference. It's going to be all the speakers coming from very eminent universities, Harvard, MIT, and God knows where, are black African Americans, most of them. I'm going with Thomas Brophy, my co-author of Black Genesis, and it is basically presenting various facets of evidence that brings us to the origins of the pharaonic civilization, and probably the origins of civilization as a whole. But when I was there in February and I spoke at the University of Columbia, I said something that may shock you, but it's the truth. I said, I'm a black man turned white. You all are that. And we know now from genetic studies that somewhere around 200,000 BC, some woman, we call her the African Eve, we've traced her through the so-called matriarchal genes, the MT DNA, as we call it. It was done in Oxford, by the way, by Professor Oppenheimer about 20 years ago. It's now well accepted. And she gave birth to the first modern man. And there existed humans before, but they were not modern man. First modern man or woman, we don't know if it's a man or a woman, who emerges from this African Eve. 60,000, in about 60,000 BC, a group started moving out of Africa from this source. Every single human being, the 6 billion people we have on this earth, are descended from this group. The wonderful thing about this is that it's scientifically proven now that we're one big family, literally. We all have the same great grandmother. And she was black. The reason we appear the way we appear now is well, to cut a long story short, the packaging has changed. The product is still the same. And it's a wonderful awakening now, because we have so much problems around the world with people thinking they're different, with man-made ideas, by the way, with religion and cultures. But the truth of the matter is, from a reality, we're all the same. We live on one planet, we're one big family, and that's the end of it. and there's no such thing as race, by the way. The anthropologists do not use the word race anymore. It's true, they don't. Because they realize that there's no such thing as race. There's been mutations. You can call about mutations, it's correct. You are mutated. You're mutants. We all are. Okay, yeah, I don't know if it answers your question.
One more quick question, because and just before we go to the last question, don't be shy, because they're going to be here for a while, right? They're going to be here for an hour or so.
No, unfortunately, I'm going to take off.
Okay, well, maybe I want to catch him running out of the auditorium to ask any more questions. But the gentleman there, please stand up, yeah.
It's an interesting point you just made about the first human coming from Eve or whatever you want to call it. If you put together a few things, it seems logical that first person, that first human, was female.
Oh, yes.
Because to create a new species, if you like,
Yes.
you can't do it easily with a male.
No. I did say the African Eve, which implies a female.
The female would carry the eggs that would create the species.
Yeah, we don't know why it happened. I mean, I'm not a genetic, nor a zoologist, but something happened for this, whoever she was, to give birth to the first modern human. So, yeah, we all have the same great ancestral grandmother. It is a fact, it's not theory, this. We're not talking about theory. Now, of course, we're 200,000 years. Now, it's quite amazing. We're only 200,000 years after. And look what happened. Which kind of brings me to other subjects that were discussed here. I mean, in 200,000 years, we've gone to the moon. You know, we're on our way to Mars. America, look at America. Speaking of mutations. You know, in just 200 years, we have a whole, almost, I was going to say racial, but a whole mutation. You know, there's been mixture of ethnic origins, Africans with Poles, and you name it. But that's the great thing about the human race, is that it is the distribution of genes and the mixture that produces this wonderful thing that we are today. You know, so we should be proud of all this happening, rather than see it as a problem, or differences, or reasons to fight and whatever. So this is the awakening, and Black Genesis kind of plays its role. That's why it's hitting the right chords in America. Because it isn't just saying we know what the origins of pharaonic civilization is. What it says is that it is an alarm bell made publicly, because of course many scholars were talking about this in the last 30 years, but we're kind of blowing it in a popular book, that we are all the same. You know, it's one of those things. I mean, we believed it, but we didn't have that hard evidence to argue with. You know, now whoever brings out a racist argument is on the lose, is losing here, because we can say, look, mister, go and study your MTA DNA. This is it. You know, I'm talking facts here, not... Yeah, sorry, that's it?
Robert Bauval, everybody. Robert Bauval.
Thank you.